Thank you for joining us this morning on this workshop on just transition, just resilience, approaches, and partnership opportunities. My name is Mariana Alfonso. I am a lead specialist at the Climate Change Division at the Inter-American Development Bank, and I will be the moderator of this workshop this morning. Mitigating climate change and adapting to its accelerating impacts will require social and economic transformations of an unprecedented scale and speed. Efforts to decarbonize and to ensure that we build climate-resilient economies have to be just and socially fair, otherwise they will not be sustainable. Public development banks have the essential role to play in supporting the just transition. The MDBs, which the IDB is a part of, have adopted a set of just transition high-level principles to guide our work in this area, and we're moving forward in operationalizing our respective approaches. Partnerships are going to be essential to complement our financing and technical advisory services, as will be concessional finance. Based on the MDB's high-level principles, the IDB is currently working on a just transition framing document that highlights the key just transition challenges that the region we serve, Latin America and the Caribbean, faces, analyzes how just transition is included in the region's climate policies and strategies, and presents a set of actions that governments in the region can take to ensure that the transition to net zero is just and inclusive. So based on the context of Latin America and the Caribbean, we know that the transformations needed to decarbonize will have important impact in employment and skills, households, local regions and communities, fiscal stability, and the political economy. For example, jobs are going to be created, substituted, eliminated, reformed, and redefined and transformed. We have done joint work with the ILO, who's here also today, suggested that Latin America and the Caribbean could gain 15 million net new jobs by promoting a net zero economy by 2030. However, we know that jobs are going to be lost in certain sectors, and also that jobs are going to be created and that are not necessarily going to be equally distributed among workers of different skills, men and women, and will depend on where they are geographically located. So there's an important need to understand how this transition is going to play in terms of employment. The transition to net zero can also impact households positively or negatively through changes in prices in energy, food, and mobility. So, and we also know, for example, like in some countries in the region, household expenditures in food and energy can be up to 50% or 40% of their monthly budget. So a key consideration is for a just transition is to anticipate these price changes that affect low-income households to ensure that the burden is equally distributed or is potentially compensated in the short term. Communities there are some communities that are strongly tied to carbon-intensive industries, and these communities are going to face challenges due to the gradual decrease in their economic activity, not only in the high-emitting sectors, but also in all the regional value chains. These negative effects need to be mitigated through policies and investments that diversify their economy and attract other type of businesses. The transition could also affect fiscal revenues. In Latin America and the Caribbean, for example, more than 3 trillion in oil royalties and more than 200 billion in natural gas royalties are at risk of disappearing by 2035. This could affect the provision of social services and programs. Supporting the just transition also requires, in the short term, that we have to estimate these distributional effects in the reduction of fiscal revenues, and also find alternative sources of funding for social investments, and in the middle long term, to build new revenue streams. And lastly, countries that embark in decarbonization efforts often face backlash if there are no adequate alternatives are being provided to mitigate the negative potential financial impacts on households, workers, and communities. So supporting a just transition requires developing a deep understanding of today's political economy in these key sectors and engaging productively with all relevant actors. The good news is that we have seen in Latin America and the Caribbean, and with the support of the IDB, that countries are starting to address just transition considerations within their short-term and long-term climate planning and within their social policies and programs. However, there's still a lot to learn from other regions in the world who are also, in some sectors, that are probably a little bit more advanced in the transition. And that's why I want to turn to our distinguished keynote speakers today. We have Vice President Mourinho from the European Investment Bank, and we also have Professor Mike Schwedin from the Development Bank of Southern Africa. So I would like to start first with Vice President Mourinho, because Europe is a clear example of and the European Investment Bank has been a key partner in supporting just transition efforts, particularly within the European Union, but also you're expanding your efforts in a more global context. So as you look at advancing just transition support in a global context, what are the key learnings that you're bringing with you from the EU context, and what needs to be different as you're applying it to different regions in the world, and how do you see the role of partnerships in this effort? So thank you for being here this morning with us.
Well, thank you very much, Mariana. Thank you for the nice and kind introduction. Thanks to you all. I think that just transition is a key aspect of how to address climate change. So the transition we made will be the largest shift in global wealth that most of us will witness in our own lives. So you referred to some countries that have their economic patterns and tissues and production based on natural resources will face a decline in the value of these resources. Some countries will see the resources going up on the new critical raw materials, and we need to make all this work. And the way to make all this work is to ensure a proper transfer mechanism such that the transition is a just transition. On top of this, you have a number of areas in Latin America and the Caribbean for sure, in Africa, in other parts of the world that have not contributed that much for carbon emissions, but that are already facing now for some decades the impacts of climate change. And if you want a just transition for all, we must take care of the transition of those that are based on fossil fuel activities, but also supporting those that are suffering the impacts without having had any benefit. And that's what we need to do. And that's why EIB put forward this comprehensive approach on just transition and just resilience. So EIB is one of the largest multilateral providers of climate finance and is committed to advance on climate actions. And in our climate bank roadmap, we defined the strategy, the roadmap to address these issues. We committed to a number of quantitative targets in terms of financing, in terms of mobilization, and we committed to put forward a strategy for a just transition, not only in Europe, but also outside Europe. Because if you want a just transition for all, it needs to be for all. And for all doesn't mean only Europe, means all, global, all over the world. And that's what we are working in. Inside the EU, we have the Just Transition Mechanism. That is a very well-crafted mechanism and framework at EU level, where we have the targets, we have all the institutional framework to identify which regions are eligible, which need support, which areas that go from environmental rehabilitation, reskilling, assistance to job seekers, energy efficiency, and we have financial means, because that's a key part. When you go outside EU, we have the framework, we are working on that, we intend to present it at the next COP, but we don't have the financial leg. And for this, we need to work together. And as you mentioned, that's very important. We need partnerships. So in Europe, we are already providing finance to projects, and we are assessing a large number of projects. We are providing advisory, and advisory is very important to ensure that these projects are coordinated and have a comprehensive approach. And we have learned. What we have learned from this experience, essentially, I try to summarize this in three topics, three issues. First, as I would say any public policy, the objectives are global, but the way to tackle the issues is local. So we need to have just transition and just resilience plans that are bespoke, that are customized to the problems faced in each specific region or in a specific country, And these plans need to have ownership. It always needs at least to tango. So you need to have a plan, but you need this plan to be appropriated, to have the ownership by local authorities, definitely, by private sector, but also by citizens, by NGOs, such that all work together in the same direction. And that's very important. You cannot implement a transition that people does not understand and do not feel involved. So that's a key aspect that we have learned. The second is to turn a problem or a challenge into an opportunity. So this just transition and just resilience plans and projects is an opportunity to build back better, to look at the issues that the region faces and to address not only the specific issue of the transition, but also to address the social impacts, the inequalities, the gender imbalances, and try to bring a comprehensive approach that addresses more than the issue that is at stake, being it turning a coal mining region into a clean region, or turning an area where we face coastal environmental issues into an area where people can live and can have a sustainable way of life. And the third aspect is the one that you mentioned at the beginning, and I think that is key, which is the partnerships. And these partnerships need to be true partnerships among equals, not to have a leader, somebody that tells others what to do, because this will not create the ownership. You need to have projects that involve the citizens, that involve indigenous communities, and that bring people together. And then we need to have public and private, we need to have loans and grants, and we need to have advisory that allow us to tackle the issue in a comprehensive manner. And that's something that we can only do through partnerships. Let me conclude because the time is up. So on the two components. Cynthia will go then through the more details in the just resilience. In terms of just transition, we are addressing it in two ways. First, identify pilot countries where we adopt outside EU just transition, just energy transition partnerships in the context of Team Europe. And we have also the other component, which is given a location, identify how to support this location in doing the just transition. So these are the two aspects. We need to bring together public development banks. We need to leverage private funds. Public money alone will not be enough, and this complementarity is key. Having all this integrated approach and the complementarity, and of course that we are therefore reaching out to a variety of like-minded partners, be they financial or technical partners, to scale up just transition and just resilience. And I would say that partnering with us, it's an opportunity to accelerate the sustainable and inclusive investments and projects, and to leverage the financial capacity that we have with the experience that we gained inside you. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice President Mourinho, for such an interesting view of what the European Investment Bank is doing in terms of just transition and just resilience. And we know we're going to have a little bit more go in depth with the issue of just resilience with Cynthia later. I want to pass the floor now to Professor Max Swilling, who is the chairman of the Development Bank of Southern Africa. And looking at South Africa has advanced just transition concepts and planning around the coal industry. But what are the main challenges that you see moving forward? And how has the DVSA helped in the past? And we are looking to work on a more regional level. What does the just transition and just resilience means for African economies? Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation. I think the point of departure in this discussion really needs to be two key statements. One is Mia Mottley's call for a new consensus, the Bridgetown Initiative, and the UN Secretary General's oft-repeated reference to a common approach. I chaired a short while ago, on the 22nd of August, a meeting of the BRICS banks. So those are the banks, the DFIs owned by the BRICS countries, which took place in Cape Town. And what I argued that is that in light of the challenges that we face in the BRICS countries, and in light of these global calls for reform of the global financial system, DFIs are no longer the banks of last resort. They have become the banks of first resort. We are effectively the lead arrangers of the innovations that will become the norms of tomorrow. If we're going to live up to that challenge, we need to face a very specific challenge that is not sufficiently recognized when it comes to the African continent. The total electricity generation capacity on the African continent, or the total output, I should say, is less than the total electrical output of France and Germany combined. So on a continent of over 1 billion people, we simply do not have the electrical generation capacity to support our developmental goals. If Africa energizes using fossil fuels, carbon-intensive fuels, none of the Paris targets will be achieved, none. And what that means is that the whole world does have an interest in making sure that Africa does figure out a way to address its developmental challenges in a decarbonizing world. And no other region has ever had to face that challenge. So one would have expected, in light of that challenge, that the total quantity of climate finance over the last 10 years would have been allocated in a way that recognizes this challenge. But that's not the case. Only 2% of the $2.8 trillion of climate finance that was invested between 2000 and 2010, only 2% went to the African continent. If you look at the cost of capital during the decade leading up to the rise in interest rates, developing countries, especially African countries, were paying about 5 to 8% interest rates for their cost of capital versus 1% on average in developed countries. When you have that level of inequality and difference between developed and developing countries, you simply can't address these kinds of challenges. In the South African debate about a just transition, we were the first to put just transition in our NDC. We were the first to come up with a just transition investment plan, which is really an expression by South Africans of how we would like to allocate and invest capital in our energy transition. But what the just energy transition means is highly contested. Some think it's just decarbonization to lower the cost of energy so you can get back to economic growth and then trickle down. The second is decarbonization plus social mitigation to respond to the challenges of coal closure for coal workers. The third is decarbonization plus social mitigation plus upstream industrialization, and that's really a radical green industrialization transformation program. And the fourth is more of a post-capitalist conception of that third alternative articulated by unions and NGOs. The DBSA is very much in the third paradigm, and the just energy transition has moved the South African and the African debate from the second position to the third position. It's more about industrialization for the creation of jobs. But when you look at the estimates of the investment requirements on the continent, there are three. There's the AFDB, who's estimating roughly $127 billion per annum is required, and the gap is $99 billion. There's the Climate Policy Initiative, who estimates it's much higher at $277 billion, with a gap of $240 billion per annum. And the Columbia Center for Sustainable Development's estimate is $136 billion, with a gap of $132. So somewhere between 99 and 240 billion is the gap when it comes to thinking about funding the energization of the African continent with decarbonized energy sources. And the traditional conception of decarbonization doesn't really apply when you have to face the just transition in the terms that I've articulated. So just in terms of solutions, I would just mention one in terms of the DBSA's experience. There was reference this morning to two challenges which seem contradictory. On the one hand, the need to mobilize more capital, and on the other hand, in particular from the private sector, and I really agreed strongly with the EIB perspective on that. And on the other hand, a shortage of bankable projects. I mean, you can raise a lot more money, but where are your bankable projects? How do you bring this together? And you've got to build capacity. And it's a chicken and egg in some ways, but building capacity, as we all know, does result in the mobilization of capital if you put the right institutional frame together. In the South African context, ours is not a shortage of capital problem. Ours is an institutional problem. And the DBSA has taken a step to address that by setting up the infrastructure fund on request of the president, which is now South Africa's largest blended finance vehicle. So it's a publicly owned institution to facilitate the mobilization, in particular, of capital that's located in the pension funds, which is worth 50% of our GDP, and only 10% of it goes into the real economy. So mobilizing this kind of capital for the benefit of the public good is really the kind of institutional innovations that are required. And this is that's just one of many examples that we in the DBSA are pursuing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Swilling, for such an interesting presentation of what Africa needs Africa it's doing, and it puts a lot of context into, for example, what we're thinking in terms of the IDB, of how we view just transition, for example. As we are moving towards operationalizing and financing just transition and resilience efforts in Latin America and the Caribbean, for example, for us, it is key that a just transition promotes equity, so the social aspects are there. The other issue that is key for us is that the just transitions create quality jobs. We need to be aware, for example, of the particular context of the regional context of high labor informality. So how do we bring into the informal labor force in the process is going to be key moving forward. As you mentioned, just transitions should avoid new carbon locking. So, for example, it's like a new way of industrializing and a new way of promoting incentives for low carbon, new technologies investments. So greening the entire economy is going to be a key challenge. And also the inclusion of all stakeholders in this dialogue as we move forward in a continuous planning and revision of implementation. So these are, for example, some of the principles that we're working on. These are anchored on the high-level principles of the MDBs, but also on studies we have conducted with the ILO. So now I'm going to move forward to our next segment of this workshop with the expert segment. So I'm going to invite Valerie Schmidt from the International Labour Organization. So Valerie, the ILO has been at the forefront of advancing the concept of just transition and working in countries on the just transition efforts for many years now. How have you seen this work evolve over time? And could you please share with us, within the context of the Global Accelerator that you're launching, if you're putting a particular emphasis on the need for integrated policies, strategies, and approaches to facilitate the just transition efforts?
Thank you, Mariana. Good morning, everybody. So for the ILO, just transition means, as you said it already in your different interventions, greening the economy in a way that is fair and inclusive for everyone. And to achieve a just transition, we need first broad-based consensus, as was, I think, mentioned by the first speaker, on the pathways to achieve sustainability. This can be achieved, and we are a strong promoter of that at the ILO. This can be achieved by involving trade unions and also representatives of the private sector, employers' representatives, in all decision-making related to this transformation of the economy. And this is what, at the ILO, we call social dialogue. To achieve a just transition, secondly, we also need investments in people. So not only investment in infrastructure, energy, etc., but investments in people. This means, for instance, to develop new skill sets to facilitate workers' transition to new and green jobs. Also, this means providing social protection to those who will lose their jobs or who are displaced or victims of climate change, or also who suffer from, for instance, the removal of fuel subsidies, etc. So these investments cannot happen randomly. They need to be supported by public institutions, and this is where also the role of the ILO and other UN agencies is key to support the development of these public institutions in the area of social security, labor inspection, tax authorities, employment services, etc. And so this is exactly what we try to do with the Global Accelerator on jobs and social protection for just transitions. So we promote investments in, of course, promising sectors of the economy, such as energy, agriculture, the care, the transport, digital economy, etc. And at the same time, we also support investments in social protection and employment, policies and institutions. So evidence from a recent ILO EU study shows that an investment of $1 in social protection systems generates, after 3 years, a return of $2 to $3 on the economy, which is, of course, a great opportunity to increase fiscal revenue. And this was also mentioned by several of our speakers. So combined, the idea of combining investments in infrastructure, in sectoral policies, and also in social policies will contribute to the creation of formal enterprises, as you have mentioned, Mariana, new jobs that are decent and where people have higher levels of income, can start contributing to social security, pay taxes, etc. So the idea is that this will have a positive return also on the fiscal space that government can use to promote more transformations of the economy and also more domestic investment in the social area. So you will notice that when we talk about the Global Accelerator, we use just transitions in plural. So not only the just transition to net zero, to a low carbon economy, but also other transformations of the economy that are today needed. And that also need to be just. So for instance, we can talk about just transition when we talk about investments in the care economy, if accompanied with social investments. The development of the care economy can create decent jobs and facilitate women's participation in the labor market, which is highly pertinent for, I think, some countries in Latin America, but also, for instance, in North Africa. Investments, similarly, in the digital economy can be detrimental for labor rights unless labor and social security frameworks are adapted to these new forms of employment. And Mariana, you have mentioned several times the formalization. Yes, I'm done. So if you would like to continue the discussion on the Global Accelerator and on investments not only in infrastructure but also in the social policies, you can join us at 4:45, where we have a side meeting and we have some documentation on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerie. And I want to bring out the point that you made about investment in people. And that's key for ensuring that the transitions, in plural, as you mentioned, are just and inclusive. And that's actually a really great way of bringing now Cynthia Lozeno from the European Investment Bank, because the AIB is taking a comprehensive approach to the just transition agenda outside of the EU, and it's extending its approach to cover the issue of just resilience. So again, having people at the center of it. Cynthia, can you share with us what does the just resilience concept mean and why you're also working with this?
Thank you, Mariana, and good morning, everyone. We heard from previous speakers of the importance of integrating justice in the transformation that we need to move away from greenhouse gas emission intensive activities. But there is also another way in which justice plays a fundamental role in the responses that we need to combat climate change, and it's to do with the impacts of climate change, the effects of temperature rise, sea level rise, extreme events such as floods, wildfires, droughts, the increased severity of storms and cyclones that are affecting the entire globe. These impacts are not felt in the same way by different people and different socioeconomic groups. So in the next 3 minutes, I'm going to talk about just resilience. Climate change is not just, and we know that. Indeed, climate change affects all corners of the world. And again, last few months have been a stark reminder of that. In Europe, with unprecedented record-breaking temperatures and wildfires, in Asia with floods, in Africa with droughts, etc. We know that there is no safe haven. We are experiencing more and more severe impacts. But the level of those impacts really vary greatly, globally, regionally, nationally, locally, and even within the same community. People with different socioeconomic backgrounds, health profiles, gender, age may be affected in different ways. And just resilience is just a way of focusing the minds on the fact that we are not going to be impacted by climate change in the same way. And these distributional effects of climate change need to be incorporated in our responses, in our adaptation response. And I'll just make a very simple example to illustrate how this happens on the ground level, really. So let's consider the effects of floods on a community. We know, for example, that flood-prone areas have a higher proportion of disadvantaged people, and this is particularly true in the urban environment, where we see that low quality housing and informal settlements tend to spread over flood-prone areas and marginal land. This is a phenomenon that's been taking place for decades in our cities all across the globe. People that experience floods in this area may not have the ability to pay for flood prevention measures. They may not have access to insurance where that is available. They may not have access to financial services to recover and rebuild. They may therefore choose to migrate, or they may be forced to stay and therefore be exposed to floods over and over again, trapped in a cycle of vulnerability and poverty. I think we can also look at the difference within the same community that is affected by floods, and you will see that people that may be elderly or differently able, may be affected in very different ways from people that are younger and abled. So to say that even if we look at a simple, let's say, extreme event that we have experienced over and over, which we have great understanding, actually the way a flood event affects a community can vary greatly globally, but also at the local level. That's just one example. I hope that helps understand what the concept of just resilience is about. And that's not all. Unfortunately, there's more bad news. Often these socioeconomic groups don't have access to the decision-making process. They have constrained participation to the development of policies and actions to reduce those risks, and therefore adaptation policies and actions may actually not benefit them. Now, good adaptation should take into account all of those factors. It should be the norm. But reality is that adaptation per se tend to focus on technical solutions, and the distributional effects of climate change may not necessarily be explicitly considered. As a result, adaptation measures may actually not benefit the most vulnerable. So in the EIB, if I can spend the last minute to talk about what we are doing, is we have now developed our approach to look at the just transition, as we heard from our Vice President Mourinho, but also just resilience outside the EU, recognizing that this is a relatively new area in the world of climate change. We are starting to implement an approach that really focuses on two things. One is the burden of the impacts of climate change and how these are felt differently in different socioeconomic groups. And the second aspect is how adaptation policy benefits different groups in different ways. We try to have a stronger lens on these two elements in our investments, and there are many, interestingly, entry points to do with focusing on the most vulnerable and those that really are going to be most affected by the impacts of climate change, focusing on, and this could be all sorts of groups. It really depends on the local context. Focusing on regions or areas that are highly vulnerable, such as least developed countries, small island developing states, fragile states, and so on and so forth. And then focusing on developing, supporting our clients in developing policies that really do take into account these socioeconomic aspects of adaptation. And I'll stop there. I'll join the call for partnerships and collaboration. This is a new area, so we really look forward to hearing from other stakeholders, organizations, financial institutions on what they are doing in this area, working together to to mobilize the knowledge and the finance needed to really address the challenges of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cinzia. I think the example you gave was great because that allows me to turn now to Serge Rajaovelina from Sajanala in Madagascar. And we look at the need for climate adaptation for workers that depend on natural resources for their livelihoods, such as small farmers and fishermen. So Serge, what role do you think can the private sector play in supporting just resilient efforts and help empower people bearing unequal climate change burdens in Madagascar and beyond? So if you can share with us your experience.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. Sorry. The simple answer to your question is to say that it is very important to include the local farmers and the communities to be part of as shareholders in companies, to really be involved and to take actions into the different strategy that needs to be taken. And that's what we have done with Sajanala in Madagascar. It's a social enterprise that is trying to look at what are the issues in terms of environment and climate change and social impact, and also job creations and more investment on tax implication as well. So what we have look at is in order to talk to farmers or communities on the ground in Madagascar or elsewhere in Africa, is that the first question we have to answer is how to alleviate poverty. You cannot talk about climate change or environment if you're not talking about poverty alleviations, and it is very important to look at this aspect and how to include them into strategy. So you cannot develop strategy if you don't into take those actions. And that's what we have addressed those issues in this social enterprise. Sajanala is a social enterprise that is owned by 15,000 farmers in Madagascar. And we have three pillars, basically, is how to improve the livelihood of those communities and to be present in the market, and how to involve more vertical integrations with partnership from the end user and also the industry as well all over the world, because you cannot really get the farmers and the local communities involved if you don't have a full partnership, a full integrated partnerships, and look at the different strategies that needs to be taken. The reason I'm mentioning that is the fact that if today the end user, the consumer, you guys, are continuing saying things needs to be cheap, we won't be able to produce cheap. Things are expensive. Climate change is expensive. Environment is expensive. Producing in a dynamic way is expensive. If you look at Africa compared to the U.S., the U.S. Corn is cheaper to be produced in Africa. It needs to be transformed. Africa needs to be competitive, and we cannot be competitive in that market. And when the US or Brazil or Russia have difficulty, they turn into Africa and trying to be cheap in the way we are developing those strategies. So in order to address this issue, and as mentioned by other speakers, it is very important we look at how to integrate all the stakeholders in this strategy. And it is very important that we look at those aspects of things. The other thing is that we want to make sure that the investment, the revenues that are made during this process, and we're a very small social enterprise. I mean, we started with a very small capital investment of $20,000. Today, we are a company that has revenues of $50 million. And the benefits, it is very important that we turn this into a strategy to improve research so that we lower down our capacity to have impact on environment, but also to industrialize the system, because as mentioned also in Africa, we need to industrialize Africa. It's very important. We cannot rely on importations. We have to rely on the product that is produced by its own people, and it's very important. So looking at that research, looking at that diversification, this is what we're looking at Saanal, and also making sure that we have the proper solution for the productivity of those farmers on the grounds. You know, when you look at the situations right now in a country like Madagascar and elsewhere in Africa, for maize or for rice, there's 1.2 tons per hectares of productions. We have to turn this into 9 to 10 or 15,000 tons per hectare. If we do that, we're going to have challenges over the environment. So we have to find the right balance, and we have to be very productive in the way we manage the land and looking at the environment on how to combine those two aspects of things. There's a lot to say about this, but I would like to finish, and I would like to thank the EIB to have taken the opportunity and the risk to work with us in Madagascar on investing on improving the industrializations of what we're doing at Saanal, and that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Serge. I would like to focus now a little bit the region and move to the Caribbean. The Caribbean covers a geographical area that is home to many small island development states. So I would like to invite now Joseph Williams from the Caribbean Development Bank to share with us how important is to the targeted support for just resilience, just transition efforts in the Caribbean region. And if you could share with us some examples of how this is playing out in practice. Joseph.
Thank you. Morning. So the just transition theme is really covered in our energy sector policy and strategy. For the Caribbean, as you know, it's, well, most people may not know, it's about 18 million people in the context of how CDB views the Caribbean as borrowing member countries. That's 19 countries. One of those countries, Haiti, is 10 million, so it gives you an idea. We have mainland countries, larger island states, and you have the smaller territories. So you have countries that are of population from 4,000 to 80, 10 million. You have bigger countries like Jamaica, 3 million, Trinidad and Tobago, 1 million, and so on. So it gives an idea of diversity in terms of population, but then there are mainland territories, there are smaller countries, and then there are more medium-sized markets. Economic structures vary. And the whole question of the exposure to disaster vary. Even though it's a hurricane belt, some countries are a little bit outside of the hurricane region. Some are directly, and some have multiple risks in terms of volcano, earthquake, plus hurricane, and so on. So a bit of diversity. And so a targeted approach is critical, because you really can't take a one-size-fits-all, even though we're talking about countries that are all SIDS in the tropic, but there's just many nuanced variances. And so that's a critical part of this strategy. The other point I want to raise is that we see the transition really through three lenses. One, it's about addressing those who are displaced by the fossil fuel, transition from fossil fuel, and that comes in various ways. You have the industrialized sector, Trinidad and Tobago, and you have the mobility, which is important. Transportation is over 50% of our energy consumption, notwithstanding electricity and so on. So you have to treat with that. Then there are the opportunities for those who are not necessarily a part of the energy matrix, the sector, but because of how ubiquitous the resources are, they need to now participate and benefit from this transition. And so there's that segment. And then there's a third segment which has to do with the great opportunity that exists from decarbonization. So for example, a number of the countries have a large resource, meaning renewable energy resource, compared to their domestic demand, which means that they can participate in the decarbonization way in a very disproportionate way, either compared to where they were. So for example, in the Eastern Caribbean countries, geothermal development is a massive resource, but it needs to be harnessed. There are a number of risks, number of issues, and the question is if to the extent that we could unlock those resources, you could transform whole economies so that the mass of the citizenry could benefit from a resource that was either too locked by the way we approach this transition. So you could get a greater participation in the economic benefit from the transition to the extent that we can unlock those resources. And so that's one strategy, and we are working around what we call our GeoSmart initiative, where we are working to help the countries through instruments, through capacity building, and through regulatory interventions to unlock those resources. That's one. The other has to do with human capacity and development, which touches all of those areas I mentioned before, but in particular, we're doing some very strategic intervention. For example, over the last year, we trained over 200 persons in solar energy skills for installation to the level where they are certified to participate in the market in a very meaningful way, meaning they can participate with international investors, but they can also start their own business. And we have seen a number of that come into fruition. We have also looking at e-mobility, because that's an area where the region is exposed to the risk of dumping from IC, but also because of the size of the consumption in terms of the transport sector, it's very important that we move in a timely way. And so there's need for significant training there. I could talk also about the GeoBill. I know my time is up, and a number of other human capacity development. Because for us, this is a big issue. If the countries are not able to move in a timely way, they could miss the window of opportunity. And so for us, pace and scale are important. This whole question of acceleration becomes critical for us if we are to benefit from the resources that are vast, but not tapped, and really need instruments and support for those to be unlocked. I'll stop there, thanks.
Thank you very much, Joseph. And like the IDB, we share with you the vision that skills development and people should be at the center of the transition, and we have a window of opportunity that we need to take advantage of, and that the only way is to do that is developing human capital. Now I want to go again to the just transition angle, and we have here Jose Luis Samaniego from the World Resource Institute. Jose Luis, from your expertise at WRI, how can we think about just transition beyond energy and mining sectors? Most of the discussion we had so far has been focused on this from the just transition part on energy, but what can we learn from what happened in energy and mining to support transition planning and implementation in other sectors that we need also to transition, like agriculture, transportation, waste management? Jose Luis.
Well, thank you very much. Good morning to you all. Well, I think the common thread and what we have been talking about is the emergence of a new economy. And the banking system should be getting ready for that new economy by a number of things, making the numbers, creating the facilities, speeding up the learning so we don't miss the window of opportunity that our colleague from the Caribbean Bank just mentioned. And if the banks do not speed up the pace, they may increase the risk of missing that window of opportunity. An example of this new economy that is emerging in Latin America, at least in Mexico it is for example, the reduction of emissions, the certificates of reductions of emissions, CO2 bonds, that are it's an increasing market. We still need the institutions there, like, for example, the clearing houses, some regulation, institutions where to deposit the funds, but definitely it is growing. The banking system must be ready to fund the production of carbon reductions. A second good example is, it has been mentioned already, the scale and speed of impacts of climate change in the economies. WRI is piloting with IKI funding from the German cooperation an approach to traditional knowledge-based adaptation, which is called wisdom. In Spanish, it's called saberes. And here we're trying to compensate for several shortcomings of the financial system. First, it's the sector and the production segment is ignored by the banks. It's perceived as with high transaction costs, and the traditional approaches are not deemed sufficiently profitable to be funded. So what we're trying to do here is creating a credit line of $24 million for the small producers, to create a guarantee jointly with IDB and the central bank trust funds of 8.4 million euros, and creating a special unit within the central bank FIDA to be able to teach the banking sector to address these options of community adaptation in the rural Mexico. This is coupled with another effort to facilitate reaching the adaptation funding, which has many different plugs, and it's a bit of a maze for the small communities that cannot afford a professional that's looking for funding. And there should be a big effort there of harmonizing the plugs for the small producers to be able to reach adaptation funding. So that's another line of work. It's called FinAdapt, synergistic to both. But I would try to mention, and this is to finalize, that we're seeing two additional sectors coming into being. One is retrofitting the existing fleets in cities, in the rural areas in Latin America, both for public transportation in the case of cities and for private transportation. And that is going to need the funding both for the producers and the users of those clean vehicles. And we're seeing the emergence of technologies for dealing with solid waste. And that will have to take into account the social status of the now informal workers of these areas to be able to support them formalizing and being able to absorb the technologies to deal with solid waste in cities. I end up with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jose Luis. I would like, you mentioned a lot of in your intervention about financing, but this also has been a part of the discussion this morning. It's like, the need to speed up financing. So I would like now to turn to Rodolfo Bustamante, who's an advisor at the Ministry of Finance of Chile. And it's a pleasure for me actually to have someone from the Ministry of Finance here. So Chile is currently presiding the platform of climate change of ministries of finance in Latin America and the Caribbean. So having heard from your fellow panelists this morning and from the point of view of ministries of finance, what fiscal policy interventions can support just transition and just resilience efforts, and how the platform of ministries of finance for climate change can contribute towards these? Rodolfo?
Thank you, Mariana, and good morning, everyone. Let me talk about a little bit about the platform. Sorry about that. Well, with the support of the IDB as Technical Secretariat in August 2022, the Ministry of Finance of Latin America and the Caribbean launched the Region Climate Change Platform as a space dedicated to assisting the countries in seeking knowledge, experiences, and concrete solutions to address the socio-economic and fiscal challenges associated with climate change. Something very important about this platform is that it can address the specific issues of Latin America, which differ from other platforms and multilateral efforts. And the diagnosis of the regions is also highly volatile internally. We have countries that have made significant progress in financial economic policies for transition, while others, unfortunately, have not, because of budgetary restraints, debt, overall economic constraints. So have high levels of debt, or fiscal revenue depends on mining and extraction, and there are inefficient subsidies or prices stabilization mechanisms regarding fossil fuels. Therefore, this platform focuses on public policies for the Latin American transition. Hence, its focus is on just transitions. Regarding your question, I'm sorry about that. Yes, fiscal policy interventions can play a pivotal role in supporting just transition and just resilience efforts, especially in the context of addressing climate change and its impacts. Here are some fiscal policy interventions and how the platform has contributed to them. Equitable environmental taxation, implementing a fair environmental taxation system, such as taxes or carbon emissions or pollution, and ensuring that the revenues are used for the benefit of affected communities. The platform can facilitate the exchange of best practices and lessons learned in implementing equitable environmental fiscal policies. Also, green subsidies and subsidy reforms, redirecting subsidies from fossil fuels to renewable energy sources and sustainable practices. The platform can serve as a space to share effective subsidies, reform strategies, and foster collaboration among countries. It's not an example of subsidies, but our plan to boost Chile's plan to boost green hydrogen industry that is involved IDB, also the Investment European Bank, and I forget another kind of development banks, but it's a good facility to boost green hydrogen. It has also been an example how to collaborate between countries and between development banks. It's something we will share and we are sharing in this platform. And to finalize, also incentives for sustainable investment, fair social safety nets, designing robust social safety nets to protect workers and community in transition sectors is also something that the platform is working on. Let me stop here because we have a lot of things working in the platform: green bonds and sustainable finance, promoting innovation, monitoring and reporting on impact, and so on, so on. So let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Rodolfo. So I think has been a wonderful conversation so far, and like some of the key things that I picked up from both the keynote speakers and the panelists is like the importance of partnership, mobilizing resources, focus on people, not only look at decarbonization, but also look at the impacts of climate change and adaptation, and make sure that adaptation policies are also equitably distributed. And like working together on the platform it's a great example. The Global Accelerator is another great example of how we can actually collectively work to solve these issues. And so I would like to invite, I think, people from the audience. We know we're going to have interventions from Swiss Re Mexico Services. I don't know if they're here today. But if not, I will just open the floor for if there's any questions to the panelists. So I have one hand here, one hand there, another, like 1, 2, 3, and then we wrap up. Okay, thanks.
So, sorry, can I start?
No, yeah, sorry. And can we keep the questions or the interventions brief so we have also time for Alicia?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Malena Wollin, and I'm from a Swedish NGO called Swedwatch. Thank you for this important discussion today. I think we can all agree on the urgency of moving away from fossil fuels. But one important issue that I don't think we have discussed enough today is the severe human rights impacts also in the renewable energy sector. We know that this is a sector with really a lot of impacts that are not being handled in a good way. We know that there's a huge lack of sufficient human rights due diligence in this sector. So what I was wondering is, how do you think that the development finance institutions and development banks can help ensure that these impacts in the renewable energy sector are managed in a good way? Thank you.
Thank you. I will take the 3 questions, and then we open up to if any of the panelists would like to address the questions.
Hello. Hi, thanks. My name is Rafael, Director of Sustainable Finance at S&P Ratings. My question is a little bit different because probably it's for the moderator. Mariana, you mentioned at the very beginning about the framework that you are constructing about just transition and just resilience. I would like to understand if you're talking more something addressing use of proceeds instruments or also sustainability linked, and also how you're going to tackle a little bit of impact reporting, especially for the social angle. Thank you.
I think we have one last hand, and yeah.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrea Echeverri. I'm part of the Global Forest Coalition and also of the Stop Financing Factory Farming campaign. I thought we had also one space for a little question because a lot of things have been addressed here, but we feel like something's missing, and is the need to also discuss the transition in the agriculture sector. We need to phase out fossil fuels, but we cannot do that if we rely on an agricultural system that's also harming the planet. And regarding that, specifically, we would like to talk about the industrial livestock investments from the development banks. And I wanted to ask you that given all of the harms, all of the impacts, that the banks should adopt a factory farming exclusion policy and halt new investment, also strengthen those assessments with the Paris alignment, and encompass the mandatory scope 1 to 3 emissions reports in all of the development banks' policies. You should also acknowledge that there's a high risk in these investments, and they should all be categorized as A. So I would like to ask, what are you doing to transform the livestock sector if you're considering the divestment from the livestock production, specifically the industrial livestock production and the whole supply chain that includes feed crops and the use of pesticides and fertilizers? Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know if there's any of the fellow panelists would like to comment. I know there was a question specifically directed to me, and I can also comment on the other two. But I would love for the rest of my colleagues here to jump in. So basically, for example, at the IDB, we have updated our social and environmental safeguards a couple of years ago. Alicia, you were there when this happened. So we are basically when you're working with the IDB, those policies are in place. So basically, those policies include the issues of human rights and a lot of environmental impacts too. So that's the way I will reply to the first and the last question regarding our safeguard policies are quite strict. We updated it, as I said, a couple of years ago. It applies to every single project that we finance. The other thing that we are doing at the IDB is that we have a commitment to be fully aligned with the Paris Agreement. So all of our operations are aligned as of this year with the Paris Agreement. We look at whether every project is on. It's within the decarbonization pathways of the countries based on specific context. So we are working towards, as I said, the decarbonization based on our commitment to support fully support Paris Agreement. And regarding your specific question, our framework it's mostly focused on social impacts and social policies. We are not necessarily looking specifically into investments and criteria for what it will call a social investment or not. But we are other colleagues of mine at the bank are actually developing those type of tools to make sure that investments have the social benefits that are reporting and they're monitored and reported in the right way. So that will be my brief answer to the three questions. But I don't know if there's any of the panelists would like Valerie and Mark. I also want to jump in with a reply.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I would like to answer the comment from the Swedish NGO, Swedwatch. What we are doing at the ILO together also with the Coalition for Social Investments of the FIX is to look at ways where the participating development PTBs, those who are participating in this coalition, can join forces more concretely at country level through the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transitions. That is now developing with participating public development banks a number of measurements of their social impact of their infrastructure projects. So in addition to measuring the social investments, but also the social impact of other types of infrastructure projects. And so I frankly encourage you to join us this afternoon at 4:45 We have a few copies of the agenda here, and you will see who is coming. Thank you.
Yeah, just on the renewables value chain and the job question, I think we need to look at the whole value chain. So you can't really separate renewables infrastructures from what goes into those. So that's in the South African context, we have, from a mining point of view, all the resources that are required for the production of this infrastructure, but we don't have the capacity to do that. So we export the primary materials like various rare earths and other metals, and we import back that infrastructure mainly from the Chinese. And so there's a strong emphasis now on, through the publication of the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan that's just come out, to focus on the industrialization of that value chain. However, the unions have responded to this master plan by raising two fundamental questions. The one is worker participation and ownership in the industries that get set up. And the second is that they have given emphasis to one of the sections in the Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, which refers to social ownership of renewables at the local level. So those kinds of interventions are something that we at the DBSA are dealing with through a program that is linked to the our Just Energy Transition Framework, which is what we call our DLAB program, which is grant investments in the poorest rural and urban areas to create developmental platforms for co-locating entrepreneurial and other community-based initiatives. So I think those kinds of investments in the capacity of poorer communities to take advantage of the new economy, as well as workers, is going to be essential. Our greatest threat is that we have an energy transition delivered primarily by multinational corporations with imported infrastructure. That's not going to have a developmental impact at all.
Thank you very much. So this has been a wonderful conversation. And before we close, I would like to pass the floor to Alicia Montalvo. She's the Climate Action and Positive Biodiversity Management at CAF. And Alicia, please, she's going to share with us some reflections on how we continue working on advancing just transition and just resilience. Alicia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. This has been indeed very interesting conversation, and I feel that people perhaps is hungry now, so I will try to be very short. I would like to stress three main points regarding the role that public development banks have to develop in this field. First is the need to combine ambition and inclusion. Second is to work on equity. These issues have been stressed. And the third one is to work in a coordinated manner. So regarding the ambition and inclusion, I think that our role is key to not to lose the window of opportunity that has been stressed, and also to customize solutions that has also been stressed here today. We need to make possible the energy transition, but we need to take into account that first it's important that people has access to the energy. This has been also stressed here today. In Latin America, there are 16 million people without access to the energy, but not only access, but also access an affordable price. In our case, in CAF, we are working with gas as a transition element, but it's true that we need to combine the gas operations with the renewable energy and operations. But this is very important, and we need also to take this into account. Second is that we need to look at the different fiscal sources that we need to substitute these, the revenues coming from the oil and gas, and this has been also stressed by Rodolfo. It's important that we look at these alternative sources because it's very important for many countries in Latin, especially in Latin America, mainly Colombia, not only for revenues, fiscal revenues, but also as export revenues, and this is very important. And third, we need to work in the transition, not only energy sector, but those sectors that are very energy intensive and are very crucial for the international industry. We are talking about cement, steel, aluminium. We need to talk about that, and we need to take into account what is going to happen if we are not able to really produce these materials for the international industry. We need to work in the transition of different sectors. Has been stressed here, the question of the agricultural sector. I think that we talk too much about energy transition, but we don't talk very much about agriculture transition, and this is key, for instance, in Latin America. Also land use, waste, transportation, you have mentioned that. The role of the critical raw materials. Latin America fears that we will be the supplier in not good conditions, so it's important that we really work on that too. And I think this is very important that we have been including in the safeguards the transition risk. This is something very important, and we haven't talked about that very much. I think this is key to really make possible a good transition to include this risk in all our operations. The second question, where PDBs have to work, is equity. And in this field, we have learned a lot about just resilience, very interesting concept. I think it's important that we don't dissociate mitigation and adaptation, particularly in the agricultural sector, which is one of the most vulnerable and at the same time is one of the more contributors to the emissions in Latin America. And here, in talking about equity, I would say that we need to work very much in the loss and damages discussion that is taking place in the context of the United Nations conversation. We need to work very much in managing the risks, in identifying what sectors are the most vulnerable for the most vulnerable people, which are buildings, infrastructures. We need to create opportunities for work in these new sectors. This is very important, not only the challenges, but also the opportunities. And the last point I would like to stress is the need to work together. The public development banks, we are in a very good situation to really work in the intertemporality concept. We need to work not only in intergeneration equity, but also in the same generation and among countries and within every single country. We need to have this multi-sectoral approach, and we are in a very good position to do that. And we need to also to take into account that we are not talking only about energy transition, but green transition. This is very important, and I think that this discussion has built a lot about that. And thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alicia, for the concluding remarks. With that, we close this really interesting, amazing panel. It was a pleasure to moderate it. I really want to thank all the panelists and the keynote speakers for being here today and sharing what the different MDBs are doing and different institutions are doing regarding to advancing just transitions, just and resilient transitions. So thank you very much, and just a round of applause probably for our panelists.